Hello, I'm Walt Jurek. Thank you for joining us at Community on Demand. Today Dan continues his series of 7 sermons he has titled The 7 Habits of Highly Ineffective People. Today's sermon, the 4th in the series, is titled The Habit of Living in the Past. Dan uses Numbers chapter 11 verses 4 through 34 to help us learn from the people of Israel who had stopped their forward progress, were living wasted lives, and were suffering incredible emotional damage because they were dwelling on something from the past. This message was recorded during a live Sunday morning service at Community. Let's listen in as Dan begins.
You know, on August 14th, 2019, the New York Times Magazine launched an endeavor known as the 1619 Project. It consisted of some essays, some pictures, some poems, and some fictional writings. Now, the project was written in commemoration of the first landing of African slaves that arrived in America at Port Comfort, Virginia in 1619. Now, here's the stated purpose of the project, and I quote the New York Times. The purpose is to reframe American history by considering what it would mean to regard 1619 as our nation's birth year. That is the stated purpose. The problem is that the whole premise is false. Now, let me explain what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's false that African slaves arrived at Port Comfort in 1619. What the false premise is this wasn't the first time that slaves arrived in the Western Hemisphere. Let me give you some facts. In 1565, Spanish settlers owned African slaves in Spanish-held Florida. Florida used to be by Spain. In 1526, a Spanish expedition to South Carolina carried African slaves. In 1513, Juan Guerrero, a black conquistador who owned African slaves, landed in Florida with Ponce de Leon. There were African slaves throughout the Americas, both in the north and in the south, way before 1619. So the premise is not true. Now, the truth is, now even though the 1619 Project is factually incorrect, the creator of the project won the Pulitzer Prize on May the 4th, 2020. Now, the truth is, here's the truth. Today, there are 40 million slaves throughout the world, legalized. And I want to show you something. I want to bring a map up right here, and I want you to see something that those 40 million slaves are nearly everywhere except where? In the United States. Slavery's illegal here. You get caught enslaving people, you will go to jail here in the United States. The New York Times wants to take a past event, inject false information, use the past to stir up negative emotions in our psyche that will invoke destructive behavior, such as anger, hate, bitterness, violence, and yes, racism. That is the intention of the project. The New York Times wants us to become highly ineffective by developing a habit of dwelling in the past, even though there's false information that's interjected into that. Now, let me say something, okay? I have never experienced slavery, never owned a slave, never been a slave. You say, oh, that's funny. We know that. But I'll tell you something. Bad things have happened to me in my past that have made me feel enslaved. I've been bullied, cheated, wronged, betrayed, fired in the ministry a couple of times. Lied to, treated unjustly, and suffered loss. I'm going to tell you something. When I go back and start dwelling on these past events, you know what happens? I start feeling like David Banner. You know, my blood begins to boil. Oh, you know. Yeah. When this happens, I become highly ineffective. and I begin wasting time and energy and emotion living in the past. It ruins the present. It makes me take my eyes off of what could be in the future by living in the past. You know what? I would venture to say that probably every one of us sitting here today have experienced that. Every one of us in this room could say the same. Some of us have suffered unimaginable trauma and abuse in the past that has taken its toll on us emotionally. It's wounded us deep, deep down inside. Some of us have had to have counseling. I've had to have counseling. Oh, Pastor, come on. No. To help us cope with the trauma. The very mention of the past conjures up these negative emotions. When I say the word past, brings back feelings of dread and depression. Our mind begins to run wild. Sometimes it's so rough that we want to rewrite our own histories just so that we can cope with some of the struggles that we're going through now, you know. We want to look back and maybe think it was better than what it was so that we can just cope. When I go to the Bible in the book of Exodus and Numbers, you know what I find? I find the entire nation of Israel had a painful past. They suffered horrible abuse, and the reason for that is that they were victims of slavery in the worst way. In fact, let's just go all the way back to Exodus chapter 1 where the story begins. We'll just use that as a launching pad, then we'll go over to Numbers chapter 11 to where it begins to manifest itself. But in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 11 through 14, it kind of gives us the beginning of the narrative here. It says, now that they is the Egyptians, set taskmasters over them, that would be the Israelites, to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. Can I say that? Yeah. Grew. It's not there. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. Taskmasters. Now that's an interesting thing. Taskmasters were Israeli citizens, Israeli officials that were placed over their own people to keep them in subjection and servitude. Taskmasters made money and received privileges for psychologically enslaving their own people. Sound familiar? I'm not going to go there. Thankfully, the Israelites were set free by God and Moses. However, during their freedom, they faced some struggles. We all do. Freedom's rough sometimes. And in their struggles, they did something that placed them in psychological slavery. They developed the habit of living in the past. As they dwelt in the past, they continually did three things. They listened, they lusted, they lacked something. I want to go through, I'll take you all the way to Exodus chapter 11 and show you exactly how they did this. The first thing they did is they listened to agitators. I want you to go to Numbers chapter 11 and verse number 4. Just the first part of it there. It says, "Now, the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense cravings, as the children of Israel also wept again and said, 'Who will give us meat to eat?'" This mixed multitude is interesting. This was not the main body of the Israelites. The mixed multitude did not live in the main camp around the tabernacle in the regular society. They were on the fringe. They were out on the outskirts of the camp. If you translate, if you go back and do a little word study on this word mixed multitude, I like some of the words. They are collection, rabble, camp followers. I like this one. A bunch of vagabonds. That's all in the Bible dictionaries there. But the mixed multitude on the outskirts of the camp seemed to be the source of the complaining. And God dealt with it. We just go back up to verse number 1. "Now when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, for the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of them on the outskirts of the camp." I would have liked to have been there to see that. I mean, the children of Israel, they're trying to get all organized, and there's the rhetoric going on the outskirts, and all of a sudden, a little mumbling over here, and boom, fire just kind of breaks out and consumes some. I'm thinking, I don't want to gripe, on the outskirts of the camp there. It was happening. So as the main body of the Israelite camp listened to the rhetoric, listened to the fringe, listened to what was going on outside, they began to adopt some of the rhetoric, and they began to believe the propaganda. Sound familiar? The mixed multitude, even though it angered God, the children of Israel still listened to the rhetoric. They listened to the agitators. Second thing they did is they lusted after the artificial. Look down in verse number 5 and 6. They're talking. "We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt." They're going to describe it. "Cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna before us." Now, I would have to argue with them because there's no record in the scripture except for this testimony and another testimony. They're saying that there's really no record that the children of Israel sat around the campfire. We said this last week, eating fish piccata and watermelon. I mean, it's just not there. Catfish. They don't eat catfish, but they weren't doing it. They were just imagining that they were doing it. They were just saying, man, when we were back there in Egypt, we had a lot of good stuff to eat. A false narrative. What is happening here, they're making up a false narrative in an effort to undermine Moses and their current social order that he is establishing there for the children of Israel. Now, the true fact was that life in the Egyptian slavery was so bad that the people of Israel groaned and cried out to God, "Oh God, send a Messiah, send someone to help us, send us a deliverer." In fact, let's go back again to Exodus chapter 1 and just look at the narrative there, the true narrative. In verse number 14, it says they made their lives bitter. The Egyptians made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and brick, and in all matter of service in the field, all their service in which they made them serve with rigor. Jump down to chapter 2. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. It wasn't good. It wasn't the good old days. It was the bad old days. They were going through traumatic stuff. But rather than enjoying the actual life of freedom and free food, under Moses, on the Sinai Peninsula, they lusted after something that really didn't exist. The past life was a figment of their imagination. They made it up. So they listened to the agitators. They lusted for something that wasn't really there, the artificial. And then here's the key right here. And I think this is the key to why we go and live in the past. They lacked appreciation. Verse 7, back to Numbers. I know I'm throwing you back and forth, but now we're back over at Numbers, okay? Numbers 11, chapter 11, verse 7. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its color was the color of bdellium. And the people went about and gathered it, ground it on millstones, beat it in the mortar, cooked it in the pans, made cakes of it. Its taste was like the taste of pastry prepared with oil. And when the dew fell on the camp in the night, the manna fell on it. Rather than thanking God for their freedom and their free food from heaven and enjoying the good life under the shade of God's glory. God had a pillar that went up and spread out, and they were in the cool breeze. Rather than thanking God for that, they decided to live in the past. Think about it. Think about this. They could use the manna to make bread, cakes, pastries. It's already said that. But I think they could make more. Donuts. Amen. That's why we have donuts here. Waffles. Bagels. Pancakes. Yes. Well, they had sheep and goats where they could make cheese and butter and cream cheese and pastries. And now here's the thing. They could make those things, but the cool thing about it, it was all healthy. It was manna from heaven. It had vitamins in it. It didn't have cholesterol. It didn't have saturated fats. It was good for you. You could eat it. Forget the keto stuff, you know. Get on the Manna diet. Life was great. And they were grumbling. I hate those donuts. Can you see it? Living in the past, even though some of it was made up, was ruining their lives. It was ruining their future. Living in the past would cause them to waste time, waste life, and for 40 years walk around and around and around in circles, grumbling and complaining like we've talked about, because what are they doing? They're going back and living in the past and wishing they could do something that they never did in the first place. So how does that apply to us? When we live in the past, whether it be a horrible traumatic experience, and like I said, many of us have had them, or whether it be some artificial thing that we've made up that we want to go back to, and those are the two things that we look at, it ruins our future. It ruins where we're living right now. It ruins life. It causes us to quit living. And we waste so much emotion, so much time. So when we live in the past, there are some things that are consequences. In fact, some things that we can take from the text here that will cause negative consequences in our lives. And I want to go through those and then spend a very short time showing how that we can break this horrible habit of living in the past. Here are the three things that it does. Number one, when we live in the past, our ingratitude angers God. Let me say that again. Our ingratitude angers God. Verses 4 through 6. The children of Israel wept again and said, our whole being is dried up. There's nothing at all except this manna before our eyes. Watch what happens next, down in verse number 10. Then Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, everyone at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was greatly aroused. These people that had been delivered were a bunch of ingrates. They're standing at the door of their tents. They've been whining in there with their families. And I get the picture. They're glaring. They're murmuring. They're whining about this delicious, healthy, free manna. Man, I'm so tired of cheese cream pastries with strawberry. I hate it. I can't stand it anymore. Let's go back to that map, okay? I want you to just look at this for a minute. This map represents the world today, where slavery, legalized slavery, exists. And I want you to just look at this for a minute. And there's the rhetoric out there right now that says, America's horrible, America's terrible. This is absolutely the best place in the world to be living right now. And Houston, Texas is like at the heart of that, okay? I mean, and I want you to understand that because we're spoiled. If I could take you guys on a mission trip to some of the places that I've been, you'd look at it and be shocked. How do people live like this? How do those poor little kids? It makes you want to adopt them right then and bring them home, So what do you do if life in the United States is better? If we've got it this good, then what do you do? Let me take you to 1 Thessalonians 5:18. Paul tells us exactly what to do. He says, rejoice always. Pray without ceasing. In everything give thanks. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. When we think about what we have, how that God has blessed us in so many ways, we must rejoice. Because our ingratitude, there's no one that has received the blessings of God like we have here in America. Like we have here today. It's so funny to me. People from New York and people from Chicago and people from California and Oregon. I was talking to one of the professors yesterday. He said, man, people are just flooding out of Oregon like crazy. And they've got their eye on Texas, Everyone does. Gratitude is the key to peace and joy and a highly effective life. When Satan begins his agitation, he begins to tell you, okay, man, you're a victim. You need to be sorry. You don't have it good. Dwell on the past. Look what people did to you. You're broken because of people. When that happens, I challenge you to pull out your gratitude card. Just pull it out and say, thank you, God. In fact, thank you for allowing me to suffer. If I'm suffering, which I'm probably not, Be thankful. It changes you. It's an amazing thing when you just start thanking God. And when you start your prayers, sometimes I say, Lord, thank you for this, and thank you for that, and thank you for this person, that person. And I forget what I was going to pray for. What was I going to pray for here? So our ingratitude angers God. The second thing happens is our immaturity agitates leadership. Look at look down there. It says, and Moses also was displeased. The word displeased is resh aine in the Hebrew. It means bad eye, evil eye. So I get this picture. Moses walking down the tent row. All these people are standing out there evil eyeing him, and he's evil eyeing them back, you know. Sounds kind of immature to me. This kind of immaturity among the people is so discouraging for leadership. I want to read you Moses' testimony, which is right here. And I want to show you how he felt. As God has been giving so much to these people, and they're complaining, look what happens starting in verse number 11. So Moses said to the Lord, why have you afflicted me, your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you've laid the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I beget them? That you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a guardian carries a nursing child to the land which you swore to their fathers? Where am I going to get meat to get all these people, to give all these people? For they weep all over me, saying, give us meat, that we may eat. I am not able to bear all these people alone, because the burden is too heavy for me. I'm a victim now, Lord. If you treat me like this, just shoot me. Isn't that what he says? Just kill me right here now. I understand what you're feeling, Moses. My pastor told me, he said, Dan, if you're going to go into the ministry, I want to tell you one thing right now. People will be the most discouraging thing that you face in the ministry. One of the most discouraging things for a leader is to be tolerant. When immature, caustic, insensitive, whining, complaining, immature people start whining about not having enough donuts, you know, or eating too many donuts, as this case is. When we start dwelling on the past, we will begin to whine and complain and gripe. We will. No doubt. The better thing is to be appreciative, affirming, rather than to agitate. We become part of the team. We try to move forward with vision. And then what happens is as we pull together toward the ministry, we become highly effective people. We begin to move forward instead of highly ineffective. So understand that when we start dwelling on the past, our ingratitude angers God, our immaturity agitates leadership, and our indulgence accelerates disaster. Let me continue to read. Do a lot of reading today. You shall say to the people, God talking to Moses, you shall say to the people, consecrate yourself, for tomorrow you shall eat meat. You will have, for you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, who will give us meat to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat not 1 day or 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils. That's pretty descriptive, isn't it? And becomes loathsome to you, because you have despised the Lord who is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why did we ever come out of Egypt? Why did we do this? The more they indulged in the rhetoric and the complaining about the past, the more they thought about that meat. And the more they thought about that meat, the more they hated the good food. And God said, okay, enough is enough. You can have it. You have all the meat you want. In fact, there's a covey of quail just right over there. And I'm going to get a little wind blowing. and it's going to come in your direction. You're going to have all the meat you want. Let's continue to read, okay? Now, a wind went out from the Lord and brought quail from the sea, left them fluttering near the camp about a day's journey on this side and about a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, about 2 cubits. A cubit's about 18 inches, so about this high. Can you imagine that? Above the surface of the ground, and the people stayed up all day and all night and all the next day and gathered the quail. He who had gathered the least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So the name of the place was Kibroth Hattaavah, which means graves of craving, because there they buried the people who had yielded to the craving. Some scholars suggest that probably what had happened, and I don't know, that maybe the quail were feeding on hemlock seed before they came into the camp, which is poisonous. I don't know. I don't know how it happened. It happened here. So indulging themselves in the past caused a disaster for them. Now, I'm not saying that indulging in the past will cause us to literally die, okay? But it will kill relationships. It will kill our vision. It will kill our energy. It will draw us down until we become highly ineffective and begin to waste our time. So the question is, if dwelling and indulging in the past can be so damaging to us, what can you do? What can we do to break this habit? Before answering that question, I want to remind you of something by way of an illustration, something that you have experienced, but you may not know that you've experienced. But let me go back a little bit in history to bring you up to date. In 1973, I graduated from Bible college. I'm pretty excited. I really wanted to spend the rest of my life impacting the world for the cause of Christ. That same year, something horrible happened, and you know what happened? In January of 23rd, 1973, R.V. Wade legalized the wholesale slaughter of millions upon millions of babies. It went into law legalizing abortion on a federal level. The Supreme Court vote that day was 7-2 in favor of legalizing abortion. And it has been a horrible industry. And so over the past 50 years of ministry, I've tried to do as much as I can to offset this horrible thing that is in America. I mean, I've preached sermons. You know that I've preached sermons. I've raised money. We've raised money every year. We raised money last year. I stood right there across from the Planned Parenthood petitioning Planned. I've done it. I've done it with some of you guys. Petitioning Planned Parenthood, which is our local abortion clinic. I've attended pro-life rallies. I've attended pro-life banquets. And here's what would happen to me. When I would do one of these things, I'd begin to think about the past. I'd begin to think about 60 million babies that have been slaughtered. I'd begin to think about the industries that and the inventions that we've probably lost because of these lost little children that have been slaughtered by the hand. I would think about doctors who are supposed to be saving lives that are taking lives. I would think about politicians who would try to make a deal and fund more abortion just so that they could serve another term in office with my tax money. And as I begin to think about those things, I'm telling you, it made my blood boil. It made me angry. I wanted to do something. I mean, this is not right. Then last year, we decided to do something different. I don't know if you remember this, but what we began last year on September the 23rd, 2021, actually, last year, we began a campaign of 40 Days of Life, and we began praying for an end to abortion in America. Do you remember that? Do you remember what a lot of us probably thought? Well, we'll pray about it, but it'll never happen. You know, I mean, we prayed. We cried out to God. Can you believe what happened a week ago Tuesday? Can you believe that the Supreme Court? Let me read you the for you that ignore the news. The ruling came down to take the power away from the Supreme Court, take it back to the states, and allow the states to make the decision. Here's what the opinion was pretty long, but this statement just stands out in bold in the opinion written by Alito. It says, "We hold that Roe and Casey must be overturned." It's in the opinion. Those two landmark cases. You say, why did you kind of switch and start talking about abortion and that? I'll tell you why. It's because what we did, we stopped getting angry. I stopped getting angry about all the past and began to pray. Thank God for the pro-life organizations around here. I thank God for the assistance centers that help women. I thank God and begin praying, and that seems to be the key to turn things around. Thanksgiving, prayer. Thanksgiving, prayer. So how do we end this today? What do we do? Let me give you three things. Number one, start thanking God right now. Thank Him for your fortune. Thank Him for where He has brought you, because every one of us sitting here today have it better than we've ever had it before. Number two, start praying for an end to your dwelling in the past. If you're struggling there, just pray, God, I don't want to do this anymore. And I can't do it on my own. So I'm praying that you will help me to put the past behind me and not look at it anymore. Number three, start living for the future. God is doing some great things right here in this congregation. You need to join in and let God work in your life. And I'll tell you, folks, you will get to the proverbial promised land of victorious living when you put the past behind you, break the habit, and start living in the present and living for the future.
On behalf of Pastor Dan and the folks at Community, thank you for joining us today at Community on Demand. Feel free to share this link with others, and please know you are always welcome to be our guest during a live service any Sunday morning at our campus in The Woodlands, Texas. For more information, just click on the link, www.cbcwoodlands.org. I hope you will again join us at Community on Demand.